The Bible is one of the most influential books in all of human history. You've probably heard the stories of Adam and Eve, David and Goliath, Moses and the Ten Commandments, but most people don't know this famous book is full of gruesome biblical violence triggered by revenge, lust, and jealousy. Some of these crimes are so outrageous they'll shock you. Today, let's go way back in time and take a look at 4 of recorded history's first true crimes. Good to see you. I'm Chris, and this is True Crime Recaps. If you like getting all the crime in half the time, you're in the right place. Every week, my wife Amy and I are recapping the crimes you've heard of, and some you haven't. But this channel wouldn't be the same without you, and we'd love it if you took a second to hit subscribe and the bell so we can make this a regular thing. One of the first and most famous true crimes ever told is the story of Cain and Abel. As a refresher for those of you who haven't been to Sunday school in a while, Cain and Abel were the sons of Adam and Eve. And Cain was the oldest, but Abel was the favorite, and the two of them worked together. They were kind of stuck with each other since the Bible says they were one of the first humans on earth. Cain farmed the land while his little brother was a shepherd, but when they offered sacrifices out of respect to the Lord, it quickly became clear to Cain that it wasn't just their parents that favored their younger son. So did God, and that didn't sit right with him at all. He became consumed with jealousy and anger. So one night he invited Abel out to the fields to take a walk, but instead of hugging it out, he attacked. And that's where the story in Genesis leaves off. We know Abel died in that field, but the murder weapon is a mystery. And most people assume Cain bashed him over the head with a rock, but that's just a guess. The Bible never actually gives any details. But, like any true crime, there are clues, and it's all in the names. Most biblical scholars agree that Abel means fleeting breath, which is a pretty good indication that his time on earth was going to be short. So following that logic, what does Cain's name mean? Spear. The subject of our next story is one of the most well-known characters in the Bible, Jezebel. For thousands of years, she's gone by only one name, like Madonna. In fact, the very mention of her name has become synonymous with wickedness, but the details of her story have all but disappeared into history. And today, most people don't even know what she did, not to mention what happened to her. Well, pull up a chair. Her story is told in 1st and 2nd Kings, which is fitting because she was a queen. She married King Ahab, the ruler of the northern kingdom of Israel, but this was no fairy tale. Jezebel got caught up in politics and used her power as queen for evil instead of good. And her first priority was to convert the people in her kingdom to her religion. It involved many gods and ritual sex, especially in the temples, which was a doctrine that shocked and upset the people of the kingdom. When her husband became a believer, it wasn't hard for her to convince him to turn his soldiers into her personal hit squad, and he commanded them to murder her enemies. Now, this would be like Jill Biden convincing the president to worship Satan and kill anyone who refused. Eventually, the people revolted, sides were drawn, her followers were smited, and the king was killed in battle. And his oldest son was next in line for the throne, but he didn't sit on it long before he mysteriously fell out of his window and perished. And luckily for Jezebel, there was another son waiting in the wings to put on the crown. And as long as her family was in power, she ruled as queen mother. Unfortunately, her youngest wasn't long for this world either. You know how it goes. With great power comes even greater power struggle, and that was especially true in those days. When her only surviving son was also killed, the powerful Queen Jezebel had almost no supporters and she faced certain death. Her worst enemy was the military commander who wanted to claim the throne for himself. When he returned from battle, he found the queen dressed to the nines waiting for him in her tower. From the courtyard below, he spotted her in the window and ordered his soldiers to throw her out of it. But the fall didn't kill her. It was the horses below that trampled her to death, and her blood splattered on the walls and the animals. Now, seeing what was happening, the commander and his soldiers turned away and went inside for dinner. After a few drinks, the commander decided she deserved a proper burial since she was born a princess after all. But by the time they came back to collect her body, all that was left was her skull, feet, and the palms of her hands. The dogs had eaten every part of her flesh. From a doomed queen to a greedy king, next up is the story of a ruler who swallowed the sword of his enemy, but not in the way you might think. King Eglon of Moab was hated by the people of Israel. And if this was an episode of Game of Thrones, this guy would be Joffrey Baratheon on the Iron Throne. King Eglon was oppressive and evil, and he reigned for 18 years, but nothing lasts forever. And according to the book of Job, he was sitting on his throne without a care in the world while he accepted his annual tributes from his subjects. So, when one of the men kneeling before him said God had sent him with a secret message to deliver, he was intrigued. It's not every day that God sends someone with a personal message to deliver. But there was a catch. He needed to tell him in private. Now, normally the king wouldn't be left alone unguarded, but he was so curious about what he had to say that he sent everyone out of the room. That would prove to be a mistake. When the two men were alone, the assassin revealed God's message. It was an 18-inch double-edged sword he managed to smuggle under his cloak. And when he plunged the blade into the king's enormous belly, the handle itself sunk all the way in and disemboweled him. But the king was so fat he couldn't pull it out, and the folds of his stomach eventually closed over it, hiding it from view so completely that the king's own servants didn't realize what had happened when they returned. They saw him struggling, but thought he was trying to relieve himself, so they left him alone. And it wasn't until he drew his last breath that they knew he was gone. Violent revenge is a common theme in the Old Testament, and I've got one more story for you. It's all about the citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah. Those are the two cities that were so filled with evil that the Bible says God wiped them off the face of the earth with fire and brimstone. Well, the people that lived there were called the Canaanites, and they were locked in battle with the Israelites for hundreds of years. One of the army commanders, Sisera, was especially ruthless, but not invincible. His army was on a losing side of a battle, so he ran away to save himself, leaving his men behind to die. But fate was coming for him. He was wandering somewhat aimlessly, hoping to find somewhere safe to stay, when he stumbled across a group of tents set up into a campsite. And when he got closer, he noticed a woman standing at the entrance of a tent, gesturing him in. She sweetly offered him a place to stay, and he gratefully accepted, never once believing that a woman could do him harm. But he would soon regret his decision. Her name was Jael, and she was no ordinary woman. She was the wife of a rival king. But all Sisera saw was a welcoming hostess and a warm bed. So he didn't hesitate to drink the heavy milk she gave him. She could see he was tired, so she told him she would keep watch in case of trouble so he could just sleep. And just as she hoped, the milk and her reassurance soothed him enough that he fell into a deep sleep, but she had no intention of protecting him. Thinking quickly, she grabbed the closest thing to a weapon she had on hand, a tent peg. And while he was peacefully sleeping, she picked up a hammer and drove the peg through his temple into the ground. One thing's for sure, the Old Testament was no place for people with a weak stomach. There are many more stories that could be told, but these recaps were some of the most shocking. Now, thanks for spending your time with me today. If you like getting all the crime in half the time, we'd love it if you'd give this a like and subscribe so you never miss a recap. Until next time, take care.